but I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. So don't be afraid to let them show your true colors. True colors are beautiful like a rainbow.
Either a policy or an outcome is different for men versus women, girls versus boys, for no other reason than gender. So there's no reasonable basis for the difference. And it's a difference that is to the advantage of either males or females. I guess gender bias could be in either direction. Generally, we don't think of it that way.
Assumptions people make and the cultural roles that are assigned to women and men, and how those play out in everything from jobs to opportunities of other kinds.
Gender bias is where anyone is evaluating your ability to do something based on your gender as opposed to your ability to do something. So if they are biased against you based on your gender, rather looking at the facts of whether or not you can do a high quality job, then that's gender bias. And I don't care if you're male or female or something, some other gender orientation whatsoever, it's the same.
Be something that is obviously based on gender and produces a bias. So, for example, if there's a situation in which one gender is looked upon stereotypically as the more powerful gender in that situation, I would call that as gender bias, because people are looking at it as they have a bias, whether it's from the inside or from the outside. So there would be two things in that.
This experience, which Black Americans were having, did not go unnoticed by the rest of America. Something had started that was beginning to spread, a new kind of pride, identity, and consciousness that was about to turn the mass movements of the 1960s into new and different forms of activism.
Now, we fought the public accommodations fight 10 years ago with the blacks. Are we going to have to start all over again with women?
How about, would you like a sign up there that said blacks only or whites only? It's the same principle, sir. Women are persons, women are people. Persons, and we want to be able to come and go through it, and we don't want to be intimidated by signs that say men's buffet.
I have no intentions of taking the sign down or changing the sign. If you can get a court order to take it down, fine.
You have no intention of changing your policy of segregated facilities. Is that correct, sir?
If you women are that hard up for a glass of beer, I'll be glad to serve you at the bar.
Here, as the CEO of a startup in Silicon Valley, I am absolutely up against gender bias, not just in doing business, but in getting funding for my startup. But I take it as one of the challenges that I must overcome. I have other advantages being a woman, because the Valley is being held accountable for its gender bias. And in some cases, I think I get perhaps opportunities I'm not entitled to or I haven't earned just because I'm a woman. So it works both ways. If you're the head of a startup, you just want to be evaluated on whether or not you're doing a good job. So I see those as obstacles or challenges or advantages that I use to my favor to try to drive the success of my company forward.
I know that there's still bias in I mean, if you talk internationally, it's very, very obvious and dramatic. But if you think about our country, it's much, much less than it used to be, and much more subtle, I think, than it used to be. But it's clearly still there. A young girl, this was just on the news yesterday, who noticed that in all the top video games, you only get one free character, and that free character is almost always male. And she tested this over the top 50 video games, and she found that there were only 5 out of the 50 where the free character was female. She actually wrote something about this, and the company, it was published in a major newspaper, and the companies, a lot of them noticed it and changed their policy. But that's an example of something that today you wouldn't necessarily notice it or think about it, and lots of people played those video games without noticing this or really doing anything about it. And so I think it still goes on, but it's a lot more difficult to prove, I think, in the U.S. I mean, it's very blatant in other countries, obviously.
My bacon ready yet? 20 past 8. Some more toast, Teen. Hey, Teen, why don't you get cracking on a thorough fall house cleaning campaign around here? Get the floors waxed, get the windows washed, get this place looking as if civilized people are in residence, Gee, that's a little light, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I hurried it.
Sweetie, have a little more damson and plum preserves, please.
Because gender bias can be so subtle in contemporary U.S., people don't notice it. You just kind of take things for granted. So, for example, the close friend of my daughter has a show for Netflix that he created, which is quite successful, and the cartoonist that draws all of them is female, and the writer is male, and they both see themselves as feminists, and yet they have recently put out some videos of themselves talking about gender bias, how it can creep in ways that neither one of them noticed, and then they try to pay attention to it. So, for example, when they have a character that's going to do something goofy and they mean it to be funny, often they'll have a male character doing that, and the reason for it is because if it's a male character, the focus of attention will be on the funny thing. If it's a female character, there will be like a little jarringness, like noticing that it's a female character when it usually wouldn't be. And so in a way it takes away from the humor of it, because you've got two things that you're thinking about, the fact that it's a female character plus the funny part. So it's like you might be gender biased yourself even without noticing it. And you have to go back and be reflective about your own behavior and try to change it explicitly.
I think for me, personally, I'm going to speak from my experience. I have 2 daughters, and I know that there is a huge bias towards girls and women being toward engineering, science, math, those kinds of things. And my older daughter loves math, and I want to see that love grow. And I know it's going to be a hard fight for her because there is such a big bias in education and in the culture of girls and math.
I think there are cultural expectations and labeling that has gone on for so long that they're a part of the culture. I think people still think about that they're generally going to see a stewardess on an airplane, that they generally expect women in the classroom in elementary school. So I think society still has that, some cultural biases, but I think there are huge inroads into that.
Gender bias always has a personal component. You experience it when you are out in the world working, and certainly I experience it on a very personal and individual basis. Then it has a large social impact. You take all those personal experiences and you put them together, and the social impact is we don't have enough women moving, and we don't even have enough girls going into science. We don't have enough girls going to computer science. Girls and boys are different. I mean, it's not a mystery. I don't think that's a battle we need to fight. We just need to accept that and give a lot of different ways. And then individuals within girls and boys think and do differently, but they can contribute. Individually, I experience it just as, it's like little cuts, 1,000 cuts. Every day. It's just the way that someone dismisses you. You ask a question or make a statement, and they answer the guy next to you instead of looking at you. Those are the little ways that you personally experience it every day. You're at a table with a bunch of men and you make a point, and the man next to you repeats your exact words, and everybody gives him credit for the answer. That happens every day. Those are just unconscious things that happen.
I'm going to speak about myself personally. I don't think I've had any personal issues at work with gender bias that I can recall in the near past. But I do know that there have been women who are in positions of power that I've worked with in schools that have been negatively impacted, and I believe it is because of gender bias, because in society a lot of women don't have those positions of power, at least in the United States or in the Western world, and it seems like that because there was a woman who was head of a school or in that level, she was not regarded with the same authority as if a man had been in that position, and I've seen that happen, which was very disturbing to me.
Because I entered the field of teaching, which was sort of the expected thing that you would do as a female at the time that I started teaching in the 1960s, I would say I wasn't bucking the system. I wasn't trying to take a role that wasn't a role that had been assigned by society to me. So I didn't even, I think, recognize it as such. It's been more as I have gotten older and I've worked in a couple of other fields. There really is a difference in what you can earn and what you can expect to earn based on whether you're a man or a woman. And I think that is still absolutely true today. The last I heard, it was about 75 cents for every woman compared to $1 for every man.
The very first job I had, other than babysitting, I was 16 years old, and I got a job in a corn canning factory where, they brought the cobs of corn in, and then we had to get them off the cob in processed and into cans. And the jobs for males and the jobs for females, both young and inexperienced, were completely different. There were no females in the male jobs and no males in the female jobs. And yet there was no reason for the jobs to be gendered. So the female job was to stand in front of a conveyor belt and put corn cobs through this chopper, pointy end first, and wearing rubber gloves. My friend worked there with me. Her gloves got caught in the chopper. Her fingers went in and she lost the ends of her fingers. It was a dangerous job. You stood up the whole time. You never got to sit down. You didn't have breaks, and it was very loud and so on. And we got paid $1.32 an hour. The male jobs were, you sat on a stool, you both really didn't do anything. If the corn cob choppers got stuck, you would go over and poke at it with a stick. to get them unstuck. And that's all they did. So most of the time they were just sitting there, not really doing much of anything. It was much less strenuous because they weren't standing. And they weren't at risk. It wasn't dangerous because they had this big stick that they poked with. So their hands were nowhere near the chopper. And they got paid twice as much. That was 100% male. Ours was 100% female. When I was working there, I was very thoughtful about a lot of things to do with social class and some of the workers, many of the workers were farm field workers who were making extra money to try to, just keep their head above water. And I was a upper middle class kid trying to make a little extra money. I was very aware of the social class differences, but it never even occurred to me that what the heck is going on with this gender thing? It was completely unfair. I now wish, when I think back on it, that I had sued them because it was such a blatant, clear-cut case. And that's what used to go on all the time.
I haven't experienced gender bias at work until more recently. Here at Pocket Doc, we have a higher percentage of women working in engineering and in all aspects of, we have, I believe, 37% of our engineering staff is women. That blows the average, the highest percentages across the country out of the water. I think the highest percentage is in New York, 27%. We have more women at Pocket Doc than, by far, I think 10% more than most people do, and certainly the average of any Silicon Valley company. But I encounter it out in the field when I'm trying to get funding. The social structures that are in place, like who you hang out with, who you went to school with, who you played poker with on Thursday nights is how money exchanges hands in the Valley. And I don't go to those poker parties. They're usually all guys. So I have to find other ways. So I encounter it, but I also think there are always ways to overcome it.
I actually do not feel that in my current job there is a gender bias. I hear it talked about somewhat. I have heard adults reference children, male and female, as having, well, that's the way boys are. That's the, they're more active. And so, and then girls will settle down more easily, that sort of thing. So I see gender bias still there in people's attitudes toward children in this particular job that I'm in.
I'm the CEO and co-founder of a startup. I at times face, I would say less and less, but at times face a challenge of believability. That a woman could build a company with a highly technical product. But I have I use a lot of different techniques for overcoming that challenge. And I am not above bringing in men to help me with the message when necessary. My goal, I'm less concerned with how I achieve my goals and more that I achieve them, because I think if I do, that makes it easier for other women coming after me.
I'm from Pakistan, and in Pakistani culture, men are the providers for the family, and teaching or education is not seen in Pakistan as a job that is done by men. It's not viewed as important as, for example, being a doctor and an engineer. In Pakistan, growing up, those were my options. I could be a doctor or an engineer. That was pretty much it. And education wasn't even part of the whole equation. So I feel like there's definitely gender bias in me being a male, being in this position, because men are supposed to have a specific role. And that's where problems come in. If I hadn't come to the United States and gone to the college that I went to and learned the things that I have, I wouldn't be in this position. And having been in education for 18 years now, I think that it's one of the things that has really shaped me being the person that I am. And I think that I would have been very sad if I'd been an engineer, I think. I don't know.
I do believe, having raised boys as children to adulthood. And but being in schools where I see boys and girls growing up and changing, I think that there are definitely characteristics, some characteristics that are now being proven through neuroscience, that women's brains are different, women's bodies are different. Women going into the armed services, it's a very rare situation where a woman can do the physical feats that a man has to do for certain jobs.
To deny this is something that is an issue for us is in my opinion ignorant. I don't know how people could deny that it exists. I don't know how I would feel about it, but I guess people just justify it in different ways, and I don't believe in those justifications, so I can't even say that.
There are women investors in the Valley. The only people who have, and I've talked to them and I've tried to get them to invest in my company. The only people who have invested in my company are men. The only people who have helped me move my company forward, with perhaps 2 or 3 notable exceptions, are men. I think a lot of men feel unjustly accused of bias when they're also the only ones helping the few women that are making an impact and increasing the numbers. So they also feel sometimes they are discriminated against because they're men. And they aren't given an opportunity, they aren't given equal opportunity to fight harder than women. And women are given opportunities just for being women, would be the opposite side of the argument. And there's a lot of truth to that, I think.
I don't think anyone would deny that there's gender bias in the world. I think in our country, it's more that you would say that the differences that you notice, let's say pay disparities, are not really about gender. They're about different choices that people make and different levels of performance. So they might say, well, sure, there are a lot more guys in tech fields that are high paying than females. That's because females don't want to do that. They have every right to pick that field too, but they don't pick it. So why are you calling that gender bias? That's their own choice. And, I think it's important to look at that and say, well, there's some truth to that. And if girls and women want complete gender equity, they have to not take the easy way out. They have to go for the challenge. They have to take the hard job.
Well, the main demand, of course, is equal rights. Equal rights to have a job, to have respect, to not be viewed as a piece of meat. Equal rights to set forth our own humanity. Equal rights to get into graduate programs, to get into schools, to training programs. We're the bottom third of the employment in terms of pay. We represent, nonetheless, 34% of the workforce, yet we're the first to be laid off and the last to be hired. There aren't frivolous demands at all. We just want what men have had all these years.
I would like to see people being evaluated on the basis of not only their skills, which I think they should be evaluated on, but that their interests allow them into any field they want to be in without any kind of cultural bias.
Is to have a society where gender roles are, for both men and women, are looked upon as non-existent, that it doesn't matter what gender is for somebody, that the position and the ability of that person to be in that position is the most important thing, not what gender they are. Gender bias happens in both categories. I think boys and men are placed in a very unique position where their roles are viewed as a specific thing, and they are meant to be strong and not cry and be a man, that whole thing. And I think that those are things that we also need to look at in that equality debate, is that not to put as much pressure on the men and boys, to quote unquote be a man as and also while also looking at the issue of women and girls as well. So I think that kind of falls to the side sometimes in the gender discussion, and I think that's really important to look at as well.
Even some people who call themselves feminists, who think that they're doing an effective job fighting gender bias, actually bring in stereotypes and further stereotypes. And usually they talk about gender differences in ways that highlight how women are better than men. And so they'll say women are more compassionate, women are more collaborative, women are more, less competitive in a bad way, and so on. I think that's baloney. Women can be just as competitive, just as self-focused and self-advancing as men. And so I think we need to really be careful about stereotypes, even if they're being put forward to try to show that women are better than men.